Okay, so apologies for technical difficulties. So this was a project that didn't really have any planning whatsoever. So I've called it an accidental quest. I started riding my bike in Huntsville and decided at some point I was going to ride every single street. And what's significant about Huntsville is the size of it. Huntsville has 219 square miles. And by comparison to some of the cities, the population is tiny. So in that same amount of space, Chicago pretty much fits. And Huntsville is a very weird geography. It basically surrounds another city to its west and annexes as much land as possible. So why was this an accidental project? Because I'm a mapping guy, I have to draw maps. So once I started drawing things and keeping track of it, I had to map it out. It then turned into an accidental collaboration. I started sharing some of this information and getting some feedback. And now it's an accidental co-presentation, and I'll get into that a little bit later. You'll see why. So the why is this is my brother. You get the volume. That's my brother running the marathon in Brighton last year. And it was his first ever marathon, the only ever marathon. He did it in 4.5 hours, which I was amazed by. And that's all my family at the end. I went to support him, and I was so inspired by him having a quest that I decided I should ride my bike every other day, lose some weight, and get fitter. And I started a mapping project. So this is Huntsville, the center of, and I started riding, and I soon realized, as you can see from this map, that I was only riding streets that I knew, and I was ignoring a whole part of town. So I decided I should go explore. And once I realized that and posted it to Facebook, I realized, oh dear, I'm mapping the city. I should map every single thing in the city. So purely by accident, the end of August last year, I decided I'm going to ride every single street in the city of Huntsville. And Huntsville is a mess, extremely unplanned, and we'll get to that. So what I did was basically decide roughly the area I was going to go. I left from my house. I took a screenshot from the map that I was keeping on my laptop, copied it to my phone. I used it for navigation, meaning I only went where the streets were gray and not red. I used the MapMyRide app on handlebars on my bike. And then I had the old 911 data from the local county GIS, and I used that as my base. I used MicroStation, which is a weird thing for us mappers to still use because it's a really old software, but I had it and it was free and it was on my laptop. And then once a month I posted to Facebook as kind of some way of keeping up. Every now and then I appeared at dead-end streets and I realized there's a lot of dead-end streets and I'm going to have to go back and cycle them all. So this was the end of 2019. You can see on the left-hand side, there's gray streets that haven't been ridden and they're kind of randomly scattered. And the right was the track that I had to do that day to hit all those streets that I hadn't yet cycled. And during that ride, I hit 50 miles, which was the longest ride I'd cycled in a while. I turned 50 last year, so I had a shirt that had the shape of Alabama. It's the 50th anniversary of me. It's Alabama Highway 50, all sorts of 50 stuff. So what did I do? I get a screenshot from the MapMyRide app. I then went back into MicroStation, often gross and sweaty, went and sat down, and while it was fresh, I updated all the segments line by line. And last year I had rules. So I started all the rides from my house, which was a really bad idea because that meant I'm cycling some streets many, many times. And this year I decided I could be dropped off, but that added a new challenge because it meant I had to kind of estimate distance and time of where I was going to be to arrange to be picked up and not have someone wait for hours or me be there early. I also realized I probably should get the city's data for the city limits, as my rule was stay in the city limits, cycle every street. So the rules: do not ride the same block twice in one ride. That way I'm exploring new places. Do not ride the exact route twice. That was my initial, hey, I want to just cycle for fun, go somewhere new. The routes should be connected. So I shouldn't cycle random places in the middle of nowhere and then come back and cycle somewhere else. I'm going to have my overview map look like it was planned. And then I would track the location using the GPS of MapMyRide. And 2020's new rules were ignore all those rules because that was inefficient, didn't matter, was kind of arbitrary and silly. So I still tracked where I was going. These are my favorite thing. And I realized I didn't take pictures or actually map where I was going, other than these obnoxious red diamonds that appeared everywhere. And in the bottom right, I'm pointing to red diamonds that are within 100 feet of red diamonds. So these are all roads that dead-ended, not because they should have dead-ended, but because they shouldn't. These are all roads that were planned to go somewhere else and didn't. And they became known when I sent these images to Ned as the red diamonds of doom. And that's a ugly map of all of the locations of all the red diamonds. And this proves to me how unplanned and weird Huntsville is. A couple of weird things I found while I was doing it. I love the sign. This is a primitive road. I am in Alabama. I found a GPS marker nearby. Didn't actually find it, but the sign said it was there somewhere. Don't disturb it if you can find it. And I found a weird Doppler radar installation on top of a hill in the middle of nowhere. So this became a collaboration because I wanted something to look good, and Ned suggested it should be animated. So I had to create microstation files for each ride after I'd finished them all, which took a while, and then another one for the red diamonds. And then, because microstation is an old format with very little export, I used map geodata online to convert those to shape files, to put them on Google Drive so Ned could make something pretty. So this then turned into an accidental presentation where I was going to present this, but Ned has done so much work, and NACIS listed them not as a co-editor, but as a co-presenter, and we went with it. So a lot of things that were unintended. People don't think Huntsville in Alabama has hills, but that's the amount of elevation gain I did during it. I rode one ride that's almost 65 miles. Met Ned last year at NACIS, and this was the quote, someone should do this, and that turned into volunteering to do it as ugly, turned into actually, no, this is something that should look good. So the last ride that I actually did was influenced by that collaboration, and Ned said, why aren't you doing the roads inside the universities? And I couldn't defend that, so I had to go ride another 30 miles. So I'm going to hand over to Ned.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you here at my second NACIS. And I'm going to keep this quick because I'm kind of crashing David's presentation. And so once I had all of the ride data from David, and I realized that there were 110 layers, that this was going to be a lot of work, and that it's probably something that we would want to share beyond NACIS. David's primary platform is Instagram. So that was good. That was my worst case scenario. Instagram looks best in a square format, which is also supported just fine by Facebook and Twitter at the same resolution, but it only has a 60-second time limit. So that affected my entire design process and really the entire way that I thought about how I was going to make this an engaging, social-friendly piece. Software that I used, Blender, Map Publisher in conjunction with Illustrator, and Photoshop. For the base map, I really wanted to convey just how wide and varied the landscape of Huntsville is. So I did render the base map. I also wanted to include the water features. And I wanted to scale it back. I didn't want the base map to be the focus, but still make sure that the city limits were clear. When it came to the actual lines, after I had everything loaded on, it became a bit of a balancing act to make sure that you could see each individual road at 1920 by 1920 pixels on your phone. So that was a little bit of back and forth, and it's also why I went with this light on dark color scheme. Once I tried starting to load with a test document with dark on light with the roads, it wasn't very noticeable. The motion wasn't very noticeable, especially because David rode sort of the same small areas at the beginning. And I went with yellow as the highlight color to reference that exceedingly bright yellow shirt that he was wearing. Make sure that, please. So when it came to the actual animation, the fact that he rode in a small area kind of worked for me because it allowed me to, it allowed some space for the viewer's eye to move around the map without losing too much information about the ride. You go look at the counter, you can come back to it, and there's still a lot going on. I also got really lucky with the fact that it was 110 rides. That was just enough time for me to leave enough space at the beginning, have a comfortable amount of time for each ride to be on the map before it switched to the next one, with a natural feeling transition. To animate it, I used Photoshop's timeline feature, which is kind of like a janky mini version of After Effects. It's really not the best way to go about animating something this complex with this many layers, but it works. And if you ever happen to do this and you're doing something that's basically a GIF, it's an easier way to do it than Photoshop's old frame-by-frame animation process. Oop, how do I go back? Oh no, haha. Okay, after we had all of the road data loaded, since I did this in Map Publisher, we realized that I could play around a little more with it and see what else we could do to tell some stories. The density map came out of a conversation with David, where he sort of mentioned that it would be kind of curious to see how many roads he rode, or sorry, how many rides he rode with the same places. Forgive me. There's no actual analysis happening here. This is just a bunch of layers at different opacities with different blending modes, but it achieves the same thing. And finally, we decided to design the red diamond map. It was one thing to kind of see his mock-up with tiny little points. It was another once we started to try and make this visible on your phone. Initially, David had actually talked about hand drawing this map, but I think that would have been impossible unless he made it like 10 feet long. It really is a lot of dead-end streets that just don't make any sense. So I'm glad that we did this map. I'm glad that I was working in Map Publisher, so it was easy to update these things, because this map might actually wind up making some good social change and urban planning change for the city of Huntsville. So with that, I'm going to turn this back to David.
Thank you, Ned. And here is a bizarre double red diamond. So I'm cycling through the red diamonds on a street that is brand new, no houses built on it, and yet completely overgrown and gross. And this was one of the things that made me realize these red diamonds are a thing. And you'll see I get to another set of red diamonds. And if I turned right there, there was another set down there. Huntsville is very speculative. They build things and hope someone buys the land, hope someone's built houses. It's fast growing and will become the largest city in the state of Alabama within about 5 years is prediction. So red diamonds, a thing. So what observations did I make about Huntsville during this? Segregation. Huntsville's in the South, in the deep South, and Alabama was once very segregated. And it's very noticeable cycling every single street at approximately 12 miles an hour and the same height. You can see how segregated Huntsville is by race. There's only one neighborhood I found that had probably an equal mix of Hispanic and Black and white people living in that neighborhood. It was segregated by economic, and you could see poorer neighborhoods, richer neighborhoods, and how they were often geographically kept apart. A river wasn't bridged, not even a footpath across it. So people were kept apart arbitrarily. Kids couldn't walk to their school without getting on a main road. The roads, there's only 4 ways to cross the main east-west road in Huntsville, and only one of them is even remotely pedestrian or bike-friendly. And that was not something I would have thought about unless I had chosen to cycle on technically limited access highways, so no one actually needs to repeat that. Oh dear. And how deliberate is this planning or segregation? And some of it is obviously deliberate. A developer does not want to connect to that older neighborhood versus did it just end up this way? And that's kind of my summarization. A lack of planning. Huntsville is basically, if I write a book about this, my subtitle was The Unfinished City. It's still growing. They never finished the old parts. 512 dead-end roads that don't go anywhere. And I've mentioned the speculation. Oh, one of the other observations, a lot of Huntsville is rural, cotton fields. And I got chased by only one pack of dogs, but I got chased by several dogs. Most of them had never seen a cyclist on their street, and they were so happy to see me and jumping up and down and wagging tails, and I wasn't intimidated. When I had to get through a pack of 5 of them, that was a little different. And yes, Alabama has hills. and bizarre weather. This kind of turned into a microburst while I was out and tree limbs were flailing around me, and great time for phone calls to not work, I just discovered. So lovely weather. And how silly was this idea? Cycle 2,209 miles around one city, or enough to cycle from my house to the West Coast. That's ridiculous. And I've done this map across Australia, around Europe, and I could go around the United Kingdom a couple of times. So where is this going? I've already spoken to my city council member and long range city planning, and they're both really supportive. And they said, hey, come present to city council. Come tell us about your thoughts, your observations. And one of the things is these red diamonds, should we actually change the subdivision rules so they can't happen? So new development has to connect to an existing one if the properties join. They are talking about maybe looking at what they call goat trails, where you can get across somewhere, but it's not a formal footpath. Put that in. I've submitted to do a talk at the Alabama Mississippi Planning Conference, basically looking at these observations. I've even suggested to the city they should hire me as a connection consultant. And this is something they have budget for, that they want to look at where people actually walk and ride versus sticking something somewhere that no one actually uses. And I haven't ridden the final ride yet because it's 26 miles on an interstate. I have been suggested I should do it nefariously. Just do it at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning and don't ask. But I'm trying to get a police escort to do that so that I can actually do a launch of the lovely map that Ned has built and get some media coverage and get on the local radio and TV, which they've suggested. So my random quest out of me wanting to ride a bit more has turned into something that could actually be useful to other people and useful to the community and something beyond what I started it out to be. So I normally draw real maps of fake places, but this was an exception. So this was a fun project to do and a bizarre, fun collaboration to do. And there is our contact information. I have many ways to contact. So please feel free to reach out if you want any information about absolutely anything to do with this or my ridiculously bright shirt. And that is our talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David and Ned. My cat just left now because you ended up talking and was really interested. We've got some comments, definitely some really cool comments in here. Sarah Bell says she likes this mapping project. Find an activity you love and make a NACIS talk out of it. She's taking notes. And let me just see if I can find any other specific questions here, if there are any.
It's not the best way to collect data. If you're going to go collect data, don't commit to riding every single road in a city to do it.
Lessons learned. That's good. Cool. Well, I don't see any specific questions, but David and Ned are definitely in the chat, and so feel free to put your questions in Slack, and they can address those if they're able to. Ned, what is Ned's? Can you Twitter handle? Can you go back to the or maybe I can just say it here.
I can chime in. Technically, it's at Man Eating Flower. I think I have exactly one tweet. I only have Twitter because I wanted to follow along with other people's comments at NACIS last year. So my only tweet is a bad fish meme. It's best to follow me on Instagram.
That's excellent. My only tweet is a bad fish meme. Awesome. And then we have one question. What's the map behind you?
Ned is going to talk about this on.
This is part of my project called 6 Feet Under. So if you guys are going to tune into the cartographic design session tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about this and the 3 other maps in the series.
Awesome. Sweet. Thank you so much, Ned. And thank you so much, David, for your talk.